This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Well, hey everyone, it's Mark Bayer, and you are tuned to When Science Speaks. I am so happy to have Tulani Andre on the show today. Tulani is a master at creating unique, engaging, and successful campaigns and presences on social media using storytelling and other strategies that help major organizations define their brand, reach their current and target audiences, and stand out in an ever-growing social space. Tulani is currently Vice President, Social Media at National Geographic, the #1 brand on social media. At National Geographic, Tulani defines and implements the social strategy, supporting multiple lines of business, and also directs high-priority social projects across the Walt Disney Company. Prior to National Geographic, Tulani served in senior executive roles at Amazon Prime Video, where she was the global lead of social and editorial, and at Fox Corporation, where she led social strategy and content for the Fox Entertainment brand. Tulani earned her Master of Arts, Law and Diplomacy at the Fletcher School at Tufts University and her BA at Spelman College. And Tulani and I are old friends, and I just noticed that she left off the fact she was captain of the women's basketball team at Spelman. So I just want all listeners to know that in addition to everything else that's so impressive on Tulani's resume, she also was captain of a basketball team. Welcome, Tulani.
Thank you so much, Mark.
It is so wonderful to reconnect and have you on the show. And you have so many things that are going to benefit listeners. So let's get into the first question. Many of our listeners are interested, and sometimes by necessity, sometimes by choice, in career transitions. And during your own career so far, you've made several successful professional transitions. And I'm wondering if you would share with listeners what you've learned about how to effectively prepare for and make transitions in your career journey.
Yeah, I'd love to. I think there's obviously a lot of ways to do this. The one that I always give advice as for other people and keep for myself really is not tying yourself to an industry or a specific company, but really tying yourself to your passions, really getting to the core of what you love about what you do. I've always known that I am a passionate storyteller and I love connecting with people and connecting people in general with things that they may love about a brand or organization. And that's really what's guided me throughout my whole career. It's why I've been able to go from working with nonprofit organizations or at an agency to TV to something like National Geographic that is a hybrid of both of those, of looking at media and magazine side with the television side and entertainment. But all of that has really been because at the core of what I do is social storytelling, connection, and making things digestible in a way that people feel like they want to learn more, they want to dive deeper. And I think that's really helpful because a lot of times people get in their mind, like, this is the thing I have to do, and this is the path I'm on. And if it doesn't work, that's a setback. And I think it's really important to say everything that you do is a step forward. Every way that you can connect to something that you're passionate about is a step in the right direction towards getting to do something you love. Because that's the most important part of any day at a job is this is just work. It's not who you are. So do you enjoy it? Is it a part of your passion? And then the second thing I would say about that is, and I always say this when I go into a job to myself, and I always ask people when I hire them, what's your exit plan? And the reason I say that is not, how do you get out of here? How do you do something quickly and then move on? It doesn't have to be from the company. It could be from the role. It could be from the place you are in the role. But when you go into something new, it's about thinking about, what do you need to get out of that place? What's the impact you want to have on it? And then how do you really make sure that you tailor the work you're doing, the relationships you're making, so that you can get to that next step, or you can move to that next position, or you can be ready for that next job. And then the third thing I would say that I think is important, it's something that Bob Iger has said in the past, but if you are liked internally, you are known externally. And the reason I find that important is because sometimes we get these messages that I don't think are correct of, oh, my work family, or all of these things that try and make us warp what we are thinking about when we go into the workplace. Oh, they have to be our family. You have to think of this way. These are your coworkers, but foster relationships that show that you care about them as people, that you respect what they're doing at work, that you assume positive intent with the work that they're doing and the relationship you have with them, and make sure that they know about you as a person and the way you work and how you respect other people. And those relationships and that kindness and being liked internally, that gets your name brought up in other rooms and other spaces, in meetings, in conversations with people in those industries that you want to move into. And so those three things, following your passions, making sure you have an exit plan, and really becoming liked internally to get known externally, are super important.
Absolutely. And a lot of people don't talk about things like that, particularly the last point and how this connection and relationship building is so critical. And the aspect of the exit plan, really insightful. I know listeners are going to benefit from that. And you also touched, Tulani, on storytelling. It's your sweet spot, expertise really in that area as well. And sometimes scientists and engineers are told they should be storytellers, but they're unsure like which topics exactly are appropriate and effective story material. And there's such a focus on the data and evidence and analytics, as there has to be in science, of course, but sometimes there's almost like an over reliance on those things. And this kind of logic centered presentation gets dropped and it doesn't land very well because it isn't really a story that is more holistic and impactful. So, I guess, how would you advise scientists and engineers? And I know you work with a lot of really smart folks who are doing very interesting work in the scientific realm. How would you advise these folks to like authentically and accurately tell broader stories that really allow them to be their authentic selves, but also engage other people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that it comes up with so many different kinds of professions of how do you tell the story of what you're doing, and how do you get people to really care and want to dive deeper into it? And I think the most important thing is that there's always a why, Mark. There's always a, this is why I'm doing this. This is why it matters. And this is why it's impactful. This is why other people should care. And a lot of times this happens with everyone, but I'm sure scientists a lot. We get very focused on what's in front of us, what we're doing, what the output is, what the data is, what that specific thing is that's happening. And I say this to my team a lot too. I like to tell them to mentally climb up a ladder from where they are in the projects they're working on and look at it from 50 feet, 100 feet, 30,000 feet above, and look at it in the broader ecosystem of what's going on. So that could be in the world, that could be at work, that could be with people, and say, I'm going to get out of this straight on. I'm looking at what's happening. I know the data. This is why you should care. And I'm going to look and say, like, how does what I'm doing fit into the broader ecosystem of a company, of people, of society right now, of maybe our niche part of the world for bigger scientific things that are being found about this part of the world or this part of a discovery. And so I think when you take that, everyone says 30,000-foot view, you can just go up 100 feet and look down, as long as you're not looking directly in front of you at what you're doing all the time. Because then you're just like, no one will ever get it. No one will ever understand like I do. But if you look at the ecosystem of how things are, there's always a way to connect people. And what social has even done, it's opened people up to wanting to know more about how things, niche things that they never even thought they would know about or learn about, affect them, or how they can learn about it, or how they can dive deeper into something and discovering things that they may have never seen before. And so I always encourage people, what is that view that you get from the top? And how can you then connect that with others? And then obviously, of course, get really drilling into that why and making a list even of here's all the reasons why I think this matters. And finding someone obscure, your mom, your cousin. Why would my cousin think this matters? The first few might be because they're my cousin and they care about what I'm doing. But what would the other reasons be based on what you know they care about? And so I think that usually really helps.
I love that advice. Yeah. Because like you say, it's so easy and actually necessary to get really down in the weeds to understand the facts, like you pointed out. A lot of times we just stop there because it's really hard to do that. But getting up above there and making these connections, wonderful advice. I want to combine the first kind of question with the second kind of question with storytelling, which goes to like your own personal story, which is another area of your expertise with respect to brand, right? To tell your own story and have your own brand, people associate certain things with you. And when preparing, say, for a career transition, many listeners are told that they need to build their personal brand for the job search process. They need to present themselves on social, particularly LinkedIn, Instagram, other platforms, to talking with recruiters and hiring managers about themselves and their work and all these sorts of things, and interviewing, of course. And this can be really daunting. Thinking about it as a branding expert, what advice would you give scientists and engineers, say, who are setting out on that first high stakes job search after earning their PhD and presenting themselves and feeling authentic and comfortable in their brand?
There's a lot of ways to do this. When I was finishing my master's program, you're just so ingrained in writing the way you're writing and thinking about, the world in a certain way and going in debates with people. And then you're going into a different place where like, you're not going to sit down and debate or talk a really long time about a specific thing in that same way every single day. It's just not always the way of the world. And so I think that then it forces you to say, of those things I was able to do in that program that I loved, that I was passionate about, how do I distill that down in a way that makes me comfortable, but also can get me visibility? And so a lot of times it's daunting because people are like, what do you mean grow my brand? And it doesn't just mean saying like, hey, can I network with you, or going to a mixer and just feeling awkward and like you're forcing yourself to talk to people or ask questions and you like don't care enough. Like you just are like, I should do this. I think there are a few ways. So one is like, do what you know, which a lot of times when you're coming from a program is writing. And I say that because when I started in social, and social was so new, there wasn't a lot of people that had full professions doing social only. And that's probably similar to if you study something really specific. I just started finding places to write and talk about social. So if I had a small thing where you used to be able to write into HuffPost on like opinion kind of things, and I made it a social media for nonprofits or social media tips or blog tips, like all of these things years and years ago. But I would just write. I would just find time in the day to say, I'm going to find a way to get my voice out there in this way and start sharing that in other places. You can do the same thing now with anything from looking for small publications that are looking for your opinion on something to just starting your own thought leadership presence on LinkedIn, right? It doesn't have to be that you're reaching out to a ton of people. You're just putting your opinion out there, whether it's a paragraph or two or three. You're starting to disseminate down these big, lofty ideas and thoughts and projects that you've been working on. So I encourage you to write. I also encourage people to speak. And I know that can be really hard. It's not always for everyone, but there also are very small conferences or small talks or panels. And seeking those out by attending a conference, seeing what it's like. A lot of times I would go to conferences and be like, oh, I could do that. Or like, I know those same things. All it is a matter of finding those things and saying, hey, why don't I just put in a application to speak at the next one? If it works, great. If not, I'll try another one. Those were small things I used to do at the beginning of my career just to get in the right places. And sometimes it worked out and sometimes it didn't, but it was like a very small way that I said, okay, I'm doing something for myself outside of this company, outside of this organization that's going to help build my brand, whether I'm here or not. And we always hear that companies, you never know how long you'll be there or what they need or if the economy changes and all of that, but you always know yourself. And I think that's a thing that people really need to hone in on is how do you find those small things, those small ways to write, speak. And I will say that once I started speaking, people would reach out. And what I didn't do was say no. for a really long time. I didn't say no, whether it was a small thing or a big thing, or I had to fly myself to the event or whatever it was, because for me, I've never looked to be paid to speak. I've always thought that exposure and conversation and connection in a way that felt comfortable for me was payment, right? That for me builds a brand outside of anything else. It builds me as a person. It builds me in my interest areas and my career focus. The last thing I would say is probably looking to you're writing, you're speaking, you're doing all that stuff for you, but also there's so much other research, so many other conversations. How are you helping to amplify that? And how are you giving your opinion on it? Are you just posting, right? If you don't feel comfortable or you don't have time to write per se, are you finding other articles, things that you're probably reading on your own and saying, hey, I love this. This was a great piece. This is a really important topic. And here's a few things I took from it. That gets the attention of the writer. That gets the attention of other people in the industry. And then that creates a genuine kind of connection conversation that you can then hone into later. I know that the other part of it is that relationship building, and it can be nerve-wracking, right? I get messages all the time of, hey, I was just wondering if you'd be willing to talk, or I was wondering if we could go through career. I know that happens a lot. And I also know the people who send those, it's scary, right? Like it's not, we always think, oh, you're just reaching out. No, that's a nerve-wracking thing to say, I know I don't know you, but I really like what you're doing. And so I think when you're doing that, find those connections that make sense and don't make it feel like you're forcing it, but say, hey, I saw your post on this, or find out the things that they find interesting. Even if it's, I saw you played basketball in college too. And as a student athlete, I know there's always things to juggle and you bring that into your career later on. I'd love to talk to you. Even the small things, I think then show you've done the research, you've looked into it, and you're connecting because you really have that genuine feeling that it could be mutually beneficial and you want to learn from someone that you've done your research on as well. So I think those ways are really great when you're building your own brand authentically.
Love it. So specific, but also really insightful and deep, and giving listeners things they can do and do in a variety of across the spectrum, right? Like you pointed out, it can be nerve-wracking. Like you said, there are opportunities to post, there been writing and then speaking and getting out of your comfort zone just a little bit and doing this exploration. Really great stuff, Tulani. Thank you for sharing that. I want to ask you now, thinking about your own professional role, we talked about, and you've really emphasized connection, which I'm a huge believer in the need to do that. Is it hard to create feelings of connection to a brand on social, like whether it's a personal brand that someone's cultivating or a professional brand for a product or a service or an organization, a company?
I think that as social has evolved, so has what people expect from it and what people expect from brands on social. Before social existed, something could happen and no one really knows the other conversations that are happening off of social. Then social started and it was, oh, we have more connection, or brands have to have conversations that they didn't have to have before if something good or bad happened. And now people are really taking the next step of, we want to know what you stand for from the beginning. We want to know who you are, what your values are as an organization, as a person. We also want to know what you can do for us. It's less of these big solutions and more of these niche, what are the one-off of what can you do for us? How are you impacting this audience? How are you responding to this that's happening in the world, whatever it may be? And I think that what that does is it forces brands and organizations, companies, individuals, influencers to really make sure that they're not thinking of these audiences as a monolith of, I'm going to put out there and they're going to love it. So I think the important things, one, branding, and this goes back to anything, even if you're a scientist and trying to find your audience, right? One, you have to segment that audience. You have to say, there are maybe 5 different segments of audiences that may be interested in something I have to say or something I'm presenting. And let's determine why and how, right? If you look at something like Nat Geo, There are going to be animal enthusiasts. There are going to be conservationists and people that are really into nature. There's also going to be a ton of photographers, right? People that are into taking photos. There's also going to be scientists, people that want to know the details of all these different things that are being found. And then there's also going to be just a group of people that are nostalgic for the stack of magazines they saw growing up, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
there's also going to be people that just want to veg out and watch some of the most beautiful shows you've ever seen. And I can't talk to all those people the same way because they're not the same people. They don't experience media the same way. They don't use social the same way. They're not on the same platforms. There's also even a whole nother group of, I get this all the time now, but I've always wanted to work at or for Nat Geo, right? And so all of those people aren't in the same place. There's some crossover, but the way you connect with them has to be different. It has to be thoughtful. And so I think sometimes a pitfall can be not segmenting your audiences in the right way and treating them in the way that they want as individuals, right? As people that want to experience your brand, but want it tailored to what they're doing. And falling into that place where you think they're all the same is really like a setback, I would say. The second part is that trying to hit them all in one place. So I think some of the campaigns that you see doing the best right now are, yes, there is social posts, but there's also a partnership with a fashion brand, or there's also a connection with a podcast people always listen to, or also you open your favorite running app and that they've partnered with your favorite show or brand or whatever it might be. And it's finding people in different ways to get in front of them to say, we believe in this too. We like what you're doing here too. And also, here's the next step. And so I think that's really important, those partnerships and finding different places to connect with people. And then I think overall, it's thinking about the impact that you want to have on people. And a lot of times people are like, it's an internal priority, or we just have to get it out, or years ago, someone would have liked this, or whatever it might be. No one's thinking of what do you want people to feel when they experience what you're putting out, right? What's the reaction you want people to take? It can't just be like, I like this, so you better like it. You have to think of where people are in the world, what's happening, what conversations are going on, what trends there are. How do you both, yes, push certain messaging that you've maybe been working on for a long time, but also relate it to how people are living and working right now. And when you get into that, what do I want people to feel? You take the human approach and not the brand approach. Then you start crafting your messages differently. Then you start having different kinds of copy that you're including with what you're writing. Then you're able to bring in anecdotes. Then you're able to personalize things, especially as a brand or an influencer. How do you relate that back to something that your brand's been through, you've been through, something that really creates a connection with people? And so I think it's really about knowing your audience, really knowing where they live and how they interact on those platforms or in those places, making sure you're looking for that emotional connection, and then really tailoring it to everything that's happening and also the people that you're trying to.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I'm wondering, you're thinking about the goals for your team, the goals for the organization, some of your primary goals for Nat Geo's social campaigns and presences this year.
Nat Geo is such a historic and well-known and honestly amazing brand. What we do know about Nat Geo is that it's been around 136 years. And a lot of us in the millennial space know it because our dad or someone in our family had all the magazines stacked somewhere in the house. And if you had a school project, you maybe went to it, or if there's a cool map in there, or you flip through it. And that's what you knew about Nat Geo. And then social started and Instagram started up, and you got on Instagram because of the generation that was getting on there, that same millennial group. And it was like you followed Instagram and you followed Nat Geo, right? And so you knew it was going to have the most beautiful pictures and all this interesting information and all these photographers that were contributing content. And that's same for the generation before as well. They knew the brand, they understood it. And so we have so much reverence. So many people like really had that respect. And you go throughout the years, Nat Geo Social has grown. We have over 500 million followers across our accounts that my team manages, over 700 million globally, I believe. And our Instagram account alone is in like the 280 million range. And it has so much reference, but it's lacking relevance. And in today's world, that relevance piece, that piece where it's top of mind, not because you're like, oh, I loved Nat Geo. It's, oh, I love Nat Geo because here's what I just saw they did, or here's the partnership they had, or here's this really cool content they created, or here's this picture I saw, or this funny post that they put up, or the way that they made this trip really relatable to what I can do. And now I want to take the trip. And that is the goal for the team, is getting that relevance back into the brand in a way that is in touch with how people consume media, social, video, photos now. And that is just, it's such an exciting task to have because it's so amazing, right? Like, it's such an amazing brand. There's so much content. There's so many videos. There's so many smart people. There's so many photos. And you're like, oh, I get to show people why they should love this. I get to show this why this will always be relevant to your life, why it's so important for you to explore, why it's so important for you to want to dive deeper, why it's so important for you to see this photo or go to this country that you maybe didn't know that much about and we can tell you about. And so that relevance and engagement and overall visibility of the brand is really what I'm trying to hone in on with my team, what most people at Nat Geo are really focused on, of let's continue to show people why we are Nat Geo. And it's a really fun thing to have a focus on in social because there are so many ways to do that. And that could be through original content on YouTube and making our own, shows in that space. That can be through more quippy, catchy, funny things on Threads or Instagram that we're putting out. That can be through creating actual travel guides on our Nat Geo travel account that has over, I think it's like 47 million followers on there, and saying, here's actually how you can do this thing that you saw in Nat Geo that maybe we didn't tell you about how you could do it before, right? That comes from revamping communities where we get photos from other places and we say, hey, here's a photo challenge. We'd love to see what you have and see what we can, maybe we feature it, maybe we shout it out, but create the connection, talk to people the way that they're using these platforms. And that's really the main goal, is that relevance and that engagement and that visibility.
Reverence plus relevance that you said, Tulani. I love that line. And you're starting, as you point out, with the richness of Nat Geo. And yes, I had a friend down the street whose dad was a doctor in Framingham, Mass. And he had he had the Journal of American Medical Association, and then he had Nat Geo. And I would always look at that, not the medical one. I would always look at Nat Geo and like those pictures. And I can still remember where it was in the house, and we would look at it, and then you've got that. And now what you're doing with your team, I'm talking about the relevance. I just saw this really cool thing yesterday. It was Leap Day, right? It was February 29th. And then I learned from a Nat Geo video on in my LinkedIn feed that the ancient Egyptians were probably the first people to use a leap day, come up with the idea and apply it. And they found these tablets. But this is all from yesterday, right? All from this Nat Geo video. People talk about the Rosetta Stone and how important it is. It is important. And there's this other tablet, which of course I had never heard of before, where the ancient Egyptians actually talk about Leap Day. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. And of course, it's hyper relevant because I'm seeing it on February 29th.
Yeah. And the thing is, Mark, the backside to what you saw is an internal conversation with social, O&O, our video team, all of that, to say what's coming up that we know people will be talking about that's going to be buzzy. And then us writing that list out and everyone saying, okay, can you make a video? Can you write that article? How do we post this on social? What do we do there? And then it came out, right? And then people are seeing it in a timely manner. They're talking about it. It's in the zeitgeist of conversation, right? And I was in those conversations, and it's great to even hear you say it, because when we are thinking about it, we're like, even if it just starts to change, right? How people are seeing us, the relevance we have in conversations, anything as small from of leap year to bigger things about how people are talking about climate change or the environment or animals, then that's great. And so all of it matters. All of the tiny drops really matter in filling up that bucket. So that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you're doing, because as you point out, like the kind of existential threats or challenges that we're facing with climate change and of course COVID can be really difficult to explain. And having this all-star dream team that you're leading at Nat Geo, being able to work on these things and make them accessible so that they impact the way people feel and think and then act so that they're maybe more informed when we're talking about scientific ways to deal with climate change, for example, because they understand it and they see why it's relevant because you have put it in a way that's accessible, engaging, and like memorable to them. So I just love that. I love what you and your team are doing. As we wrap up here, we talked a lot about goals and branding and things. And I wonder, we're talking right now on March 1, 2024. What personal goals do you have as you look out across 2024?
Oh man. So my personal goals, I always try and make sure that they are fun because so much can be so serious. And I think what keeps us good at our jobs, whether you work in media and social or you're a scientist, is having those outside passions. I always tell people I'm a hobbyist. So I think my first goal that I had this year is to run a half marathon. I've probably run about 5 or 6 in my life. I started running with Roberto back when we worked together in the same office. Yeah. And I just was like, come from playing basketball and I had to learn to run, right? Like I was always just, we ran up and down the court, but long distances. And I didn't realize what a process it was. But I'd run maybe 5 or 6 and I got out of it over the years because of small injuries here and there. And so I am determined to run one, hopefully by the end of this year. I have just a little 10K coming up in the next week, but I did 10 miles this morning. It's like a 5-mile walk, a 5-mile jog, and it was really nice. So I think I'll do it. I want to find a fun one. I want to go somewhere fun to run it. And then the other one is that this is such a weird goal. I want to write a romance novel. And this is awesome. So random. But I read a lot of them since I think about so much. Sometimes when I just have a minute to not do anything, I'm like, what's the most mindless thing I can do? So I think it would be fun. I know in the past, like, fun fact that I used to publish like a daily motivational calendar years ago. And it was just one of those things where at some point I was like, oh, I should just try it. And so I've always found that if I just try it, if I just put some time towards it, then it really can be a fun project. Again, like anything else in your career. If it takes off, if someone else ever reads it, fine. If not, you did something for yourself. You did something that made you happy. You did something that one day you might tell your kids or your grandkids, this is a really great thing I got to do that was fun or funny. And I'd love you to read it or know that it exists. So those are two of my like kind of fun goals this year.
Awesome. They're awesome. And you find too that you connect with different communities when you're out there. Like now you've got folks that you're running friends and then other people that you connect with that. I think it's fantastic. This has been so much fun. Tulani and I have known each other for quite a long time. She's doing high impact work that really makes a huge difference at scale. I'm really glad that she was able to take time out to talk with me and to share these really deep insights that are actionable, authentic, that listeners, that I hope you will find you can apply right away in your personal and professional lives. Tulani Andre, thanks for joining us. It's been such a pleasure on a professional level, of course, but on a real personal level too.
Same. Thank you so much, Mark.
And listeners, thanks for being here on this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe. Check us out on the web at whensciencespeaks.com, and we'll see you next time.